Well, it's good to be home. This really is home, but I'll explain that in a minute. So I'll be talking about the Shroud of Turin. This is a very good replica, and in fact, when you see it, the few times it's exposed in Turin, Italy, it'll be like that, a little more stretched out and framed. And they'll have it up, depending on now, they'll have it in the special chapel. But you'll walk by it if you're lucky enough to get a ticket. And as I tell you in a few minutes, you will not get a chance to see the shroud as well as you can see it right here. The big question for all of us is, does God exist and are miracles possible? Because you're here, I shouldn't even ask that question. But I had a long career, and both in Rancho Bernardo, Poway area was one office, and the other office in La Jolla. And in La Jolla, a famous man by the name of Francis Crick was my patient. The discoverer, co-discoverer of the DNA molecule. Anybody ever hear of the DNA molecule? Of course you have. And so Francis was an amazing atheist. And anytime we even came near to discussing God, he would say things like, "What? That's a bunch of fairy tales." I mean, the New Testament. He said, "Jesus walked on water? That's physically impossible. A virgin birth? That's impossible." Well, he obviously hadn't accepted a God who is miraculous, creator of the universe. So, what am I doing with the Shroud of Turin? I decided about 3 years ago to write my story because I think that unusual things happened to me. Don't know why. I wasn't a particularly devout person, in fact, just the opposite. I was raised in a Catholic family. I was baptized and went through First Communion and confirmation only because my mother told me I had to. And then I went to something called Baltimore Catechism. Anybody go there? You memorize all those rote things, who is God and what you're expected to do. And then go to confession once a year at least. That was your Easter duty. So for the first 18 years of my life, that's what I did. Then I went off to this Ivy League institution with like 35 fraternity houses. The parties ran so late Saturday night that nobody ever got up before noon. So 4 years pretty much of not going to church. And then, well, you're going to hear a lot of the story. But eventually, I got married. I had a practice here. I helped set up the chairs at the Westwood Elementary School before this church was ever built. That period of time of collecting money and planning went from about 1975 to 1980. I even have my name on the little gold plaques out there in the entrance to the church. To be honest with you, I was even selected as the assistant fundraiser until Father Bill Savord found money I was afraid to ask. So I got from that job. It's a beautiful church and hall and everything. Built the practice, went in, felt a lot of stress, but God really wasn't part of my life, but I did go to church. My wife wanted me to, and I did not go to the area of when I picked up my National Catholic Register problem that said some clause, the name of the Shroud of Turin, was going to be years. All I have to do is take a train right over to Turin, which is longer than I thought, but anyway. And I got a ticket on the internet. And I thought I'd just go in and walk through and see the shroud for as long as I wanted and walk out. So I got to the cathedral in Turin, Italy. If anybody ever been there? The cathedral there, St. John the Baptist? Great. I got there, it must have been 5,000 in front of the cathedral, just milling around. And then there was a sign, probably in Italian, that said tickets. So the people who had tickets, which I had, so I walked over there, got in line, and we were told to follow the line, not leave any spaces. And the line took about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the entrance to the church up front. We were coming in the side transept. And the Shroud had been in a beautiful holy chapel, which burned down in 1997. So I saw the Shroud in the church. Above, basically the altar was covered by this big curtain, and then they had the Shroud in this beautiful wooden frame, basically attached to the curtain. So I go in, and I'm walking down. I was walking this side, down like this. I guess I'll use this aisle here. And we were told to just keep moving and be very reverent in front of the Shroud. And when we got to the center aisle, to turn left and go out. And actually, the fact that this auditorium is so filled with people reminds me of the church. Every seat was taken by, I think, the local people who knew somebody in the local areas. Because the rest of us who had tickets had to only we got 4 minutes walking by the Shroud. Imagine in 4 minutes you're walking by, and what are you seeing? Faint image, but you can't make that out, and you're seeing some blood stains. And then you walk out. There was and he got up and walked out. My father was born in Sicily, and he said, "Hey, John, look, you have to realize that I was born in Italy. Things are what you can't remember that." Spent about a minute there before I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to leave. I spent almost an hour in that seat, and I was as close to the Shroud as you are, if not closer. And I was able to see what very few people have been able to see. The Shroud of Turin for a full hour. There was a team that went over in 1978 that studied it for 5 days, the Stirp team, but very few people have been in front of the Shroud for periods of time. So very, very fortunate. That got me interested in the Shroud. And in fact, this doesn't do it justice in terms of the redness of the blood or the wounds, because I actually, as a surgeon, stood there and looked at all the wounds and the blood on the Shroud, and I felt tears coming down my eyes, even though I was not a devout Catholic at that point in time. And it's one of there are 2 or 3 things that brought me back to the church, and that was one of them. So I basically have kept my eye on the literature on the Shroud over the years, not all of it, some of it, and I've had a picture in my home of the face on the Shroud. And C.S. Lewis, any fans of C.S. Lewis, the author? If you go to his home in London, has anybody gone to the home in London? Over his fireplace, he had for many years the photograph of the man on the Shroud of Turin. I think it's still there today, so if you're over there, you can see it. Something about the Shroud that changes you when you really a year ago, again, I picked up a Catholic newspaper that my wife had, and I found out there was going to be a Shroud of Turin International Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. A lot easier to get to. So I signed up for it, and all the big names in the Shroud world were there. Nobody knew me, so I sat in the back in the last row in the corner, didn't engage people very much at all. But when I was ready to leave, there was one man left who happened to be one of the organizers of the meeting, and I later found out, very well known, his name was Joe Marino. And Joe Marino he and his wife were the ones that found the carbon dating testing that was done in 1988. Probably tested a patch area on the Shroud. I will show that later as far as where they tested. So I tried to talk to Joe as we were waiting for the last shuttle, and I said, "I think I see something on the image nobody has mentioned before." I said, "I think I see anatomically correct lower teeth." He said, "You do?" He said, "People have been looking at this for a long time. People have mentioned teeth, but they've always said, it was just the striations of the cloth that people were looking at." He said, "If you see, I want you to write up an article, get it published, and then we'll take it from there." Well, I did that, and I ready for what happened. I certainly don't expect you, and you can't from the distance you're at, read this, but this is the article, A Dental Observance of Teeth in the Image on the Shroud. It had a lot of attention. It went international. Throughout the United States on various publications and radio shows. On the left is the London Daily Mail, Gaudium Press, which is published out of Rome. On the right, all talking about the dental surgeon who found teeth on the shroud. And I was on Newsmax television nationally twice talking about that. And these three pictures pretty much sum it up. If you look at the face on the shroud, the photo negative, which we'll explain in a few minutes, you see on the left the nose and the mouth. And then there's a mustache, and in the mustache are white vertical lines. Those are highlights of the mustache, so they're not teeth. But 20, 30 years ago, people called them few people teeth, and that's ridiculous. You're just seeing the cloth striations. But what I found is something called the Joe Holtz. Okay, Joe the dentist. I know he knows what it is. Any of you know what an incisal is. You may know what an occlusal. Anybody ever have TMJ, like grinding your teeth? A lot of people have. You may have worn a night guard. That's the occlusal plane, which is the biting surfaces of all the lower teeth, if you're talking about the lower occlusal plane. Well, the incisal plane is the 6 front teeth on the lower and then on the upper. Well, if you notice, the arrows are pointing in the middle, not to individual teeth. Ideally, I should have a horizontal dotted line where the tips of the arrows are. That's the top of the lower front teeth. And it's anatomically correct. It's centered under the nose. And it's, the tips of the teeth, you can actually see individual teeth. But then you get lost in the striations of the shroud because it's a linen cloth. And you can see the linen going right up from lower to upper. And on the right, if you know, you can see where the incisal plane is. You notice a dark oval right above the lower incisal plane. So if this is, let's see if I can get this on there. That doesn't really show. But if you look on the left's pointing to the incisal plane. So look at the picture on the right. You see where the incisal plane is towards the bottom. And right above that incisal plane, there is a dark oval, almost elliptical type, right? Okay, I see that as the oral cavity. I'm the first one who have mentioned as an incisal plane, the first one that mentioned seeing an oral cavity. What's so important about this is everybody pretty much in the past had said the man on the shroud, because who is the man on the shroud? I mean, obviously you know who we think it is, but there are many people out there that don't think it is. And when you look at this and you see the teeth on the shroud, yeah, and the people who have written on the image say the lips are closed, how do you see teeth behind closed lips? Well, have anyone here had a dental x-ray? Right, there's a beam of light out here, goes through the cheeks and the lip and the teeth, and it goes on the film, okay? This would kind of be the opposite. Some sort of burst of radiation at the time of resurrection came out through the teeth, through the soft tissue, and put an image on the cloth. It's not the same as dental x-rays, but some sort of burst of light. If you believe Christ resurrected, then you should be open to just about anything that he could possibly do. And we all know about the transfiguration when he was glowing white on the mountain. Well, light is very important, and we think there was some sort of burst of radiation that put an image on the cloth. We'll have time for questions at the end, so don't worry about that. JP2 radio. If anybody is interested in learning the really details of the shroud, we've been doing this for a number of months, so we now have a series of about 8 or 10 videos that I have done. And if you go to jp2radio.com, On the home page, you'll see the Shroud of Turin playlist. If you click on that, it takes you to the YouTube page, which has a series of programs we've done that are 30 minutes each. You start from the bottom and work up, because the first ones are on the bottom. You'll get as much information as you want. If you like to read, there are lots of books on the Shroud. And then, one of these, because I'm the one that came up with teeth on the Shroud, this particular video had a lot of views. And I am holding a typodont, which you've seen, and almost every dental office has one. Some of them just show you how to brush your teeth, or they may be your own teeth if you're having a lot of crown and bridge done. You notice that between my fingers, which are touching the teeth, there is that oval. Okay, the oral cavity. It doesn't look terribly differently than the one on the Shroud. And this statue on the left is one of several statues. We have one beautiful one here that were made by looking at the Shroud of Turin itself, which contains three-dimensional information. And using that information, several statues were sculpted. This is one of my favorites. And on the lower right is one of my patients. You could be sitting in the room, because it could be a Rancho Bernardo person, for all I know. And if you look at the lower teeth, you see the tips? If you connect them all in your mind, that's her lower incisal plane, which is not terribly different from the man on the Shroud's lower incisal plane. In the beginning of the talk, I like to talk about, particularly if there's some Shroud deniers in the room, like this is a forgery. I talk about the man on the Shroud as opposed to Jesus Christ. But in my heart, I'm talking about Jesus Christ is on the Shroud. And there's a lot of reasons why I feel that way. But let's look at the evidence. If you take the scales of justice, on one side you put the evidence for it being the Shroud of Christ, and the other side you put the evidence against it, and you weigh it. So how were people buried 2,000 years ago in Israel? A long linen wrap is laid on the ground or a stone shelf. The body is wrapped over, the shroud is wrapped, was placed underwards and then pulled over the head. So the body is wrapped, the shroud comes over the head, ends at the feet. And then a small strip, narrow strip of cloth is used to secure the linen onto the body. Lazarus comes out of the tomb. Jesus says, untie him. He's got a shroud on and he's got strips tying him. And Joseph bought the linen and took him down and wrapped him in the linen. Mark 15:46. Fine linen. Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man. Many people have looked at linens in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. They were probably made in Syria. But Jerusalem was not far from one of the main trade routes. So Joseph probably was either getting it from directly from the traders, or the temple had fine linens. And Peter went into the tomb and saw the burial cloths there and the cloth that had covered his head, which is off here. Not with the burial cloth, but rolled up in a separate place. This is also called the sudarium. It is in Oviedo, Spain. Then from John 20, verse 8, then the other disciple who reached the tomb first, which is John, he's kind of bragging a little bit, I ran faster than Peter, he also went in and saw and believed. It took me months, if not, well, yeah, definitely it'd have to be months, because I didn't get involved totally into the shroud until last summer. What did he see? At first I thought he saw a face imprinted on the shroud. He may not have. Sometimes, depending upon if it was light radiation that caused the image, it may take several years for the image to actually come out and be seen. What he probably saw was the slab of stone with the cloth on it, but instead of it being high, it's now flattened and the straps are still tied. How would a thief ever take the body out and leave the straps tied? So he knew that Christ was resurrected. Christ just vanished. You remember Christ walking through the wall with his wounds, and Thomas wasn't there, and Thomas didn't believe? Well, if Christ could walk through walls, Christ could just vanish. And we're trying to figure out how the image was made. We probably never will. It's a supernatural event. I think the big thing is that you know that Christ is resurrected. And Peter said, Paul said, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. The shroud is 14 feet 3 inches by 3 feet 7 inches, which turns out to be exactly 8 cubits by 2 cubits, measurements that were used in the ancient world in the Middle East. So most likely he bought a cloth, Joseph of Arimathea, that was a typical 8 cubits by 2 cubits cloth. It wasn't just some random number, which also gives evidence that it being the real thing 2,000 years old. And the cloth is expensive. It has what's called the 3-to-1 herringbone weave, which was there in that area, but it was rare and expensive. And if you look at the whole cloth, this red arrow points to the arrow where the head is. So if you turn your head sideways, you can kind of parallel it with the head of Christ. This is the front of Christ. And the hands are crossed in the groin area, and then the feet are down the end. This is the shroud frontal view. You can see the face a little better. Do you see that the abdomen area right here? Let's see if I can get a light up there. Right up around there, towards the upper right, on the abdomen, there's a large blood stain. It's on the left side because when you put a cloth on a dead person and blood is coming out of the right side, and then there's an image made on the cloth, you pull the cloth off, it's reversed. It'll be on the cloth's left side. Okay, if you're walking up to a full-length mirror, there's a person in the mirror who's a reflection of you. So you walk up and you want to shake hands with the person in the mirror. You put your right hand out. The person in the mirror puts which hand out? The left hand. So be aware you're going to see differences in rights and lefts, depending upon whether you're looking at the positive or the negative image. The first person that took a photograph was Secunda P. in 1898 with a big camera, and was he shocked? He fully expected to see that, which he did, in the positive image. But the negative that he saw in the dark room was incredible. That's what it looked like. Until that negative was seen, nobody knew what Christ looked like. Not really. There were pictures of Christ. Absolutely amazing. And then, that was 1898. 1931, Giuseppe Henri took some black and white long photos of the front and back of the shroud. So you could see the back of the man off on your right. And the repair patches, the triangular patches, are to close the holes from the 1532 fire in Chambéry, France. There was a fire, many people think it was arson, that was so hot, molten silver came down from the box and burned the corners. When we look at the photo-negative image, I gave my back to those who struck me and my cheeks to those who plucked out my beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting, from Isaiah 56. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fist. Others slapped him, Matthew 26. When you look at the face very carefully, and particularly somebody, part of my training was a lot of trauma when I was in the military. The right cheek is swollen. Anything closer to the cloth is going to be wider. So the beard is going to be wider, the mustache is going to be wider. The right cheek is wider than the left cheek because it's swollen, and the eyelid seems to be torn on the right side. So the right cheek is swollen, the cartilage in the nose appears to be broken. Is that a broken bone? No, the nose is cartilage. So not a bone was broken. The instruments of torture. The Roman flagrum on the left was a shorter handle than what I pictured. 3 leather straps with those little metal balls or bones with ragged edges. And then the Roman nails were at least 6 inches long. And if you look at the back, those are the scourging wounds, the whitish material. And the head, the white is the blood from the crown of thorns. This man is a priest, Monsignor Riggi, R-I-G-G-I, from Italy. In the late 1900s, did a lot of research on the shroud. And he is taking those lead balls from the Roman flagrum and putting them in the exact marks of the wounds on the shroud. And then he said there is an area on the back that shows where Christ carried the cross. Christ didn't carry the full cross. He carried what was called the patibulum, the crossbar. The stipes, or vertical beam, was probably already there up on the hill, was probably already on the ground. So that's most likely where the beam was put, because he could see that there was smearing of the wounds in the areas between the diagonal lines. Can you imagine a forging artist, a forger, painting all this details work? And then Riggi drew this picture. He said the Romans probably took a rose bush, probably took their knife or hatchet or sword and cut the rose bush, put it on the head. The spikes were so long, they would go right down to the skull, and then to keep it there for sure, a rope may have been tied around it, is what he drew. And the blood was amazing. I had to talk to 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds at Good Shepherd Church, so I took this slide out and put a diagrammatical one in. That was a little less, more like, this one is like the movie The Passion. And then if you look at the marks, the bleeding, the white on the photo image, the photo negative image, those blood stains came from the crown of thorns. That 3 was probably a straight line until Christ started, was suffering so much, he was wrinkling his forehead and moving, and that probably caused the image to look like it does. And the blood stains up here are probably these veins here. The anatomy of the circulation wasn't discovered till around 1600. How could an artist, a forger in 1300, draw in blood stains almost anatomically correct? The blood type has been shown to be AB, which is very common 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. And it's known that the blood contacted the cloth first. Well, that matches the Gospels. The shroud is a mirror of the Gospels. Christ is dead. He comes down from the cross. They put the shroud on him. The blood on the body goes into the shroud. There's no painting or anything. The image appears at the time of resurrection. Now, if an artist was doing this, it would be impossible. The artist would have to take blood from wherever he got it, human or otherwise, paint it on the cloth, and then try to draw the images around it. It's impossible, because where the blood is, there's no image. The blood seeps all the way through to the other side where it's thick. The shroud image is so superficial, it's right on the surface. These are black backlit photographs. The only thing you can really see, you see the faint image of the man, but you don't see any paint. All you see is blood. Blood on the arms, the blood on the head, the blood on the chest, the blood on the back, the blood on the feet, because the big nail went in there. Closer up. Now look at the hands on the left. Blood coming down the arms. Remember, the arms are raised like this, and blood is coming down. If we look at a close-up, we see blood coming out of the wrist, not out of the hands, because a man by the name of Dr. Barbet proved that if you nail somebody and crucify them through their palms, the weight of the body would rip through. So there are bones in the wrist. So most likely, the hand, remember, here is the cross is, he's on the ground, the cross is on the ground. The hands are back like this. Most likely the nail went here, in here, through the individual bones in the wrist, the little tiny round ones. And as the nail went through, it pushed them aside. It didn't break them. But it came out the back of the wrist here. And why is there divergent blood flows? See it like a V? I call it bifurcated because Christ, to breathe, had to pull himself up and let himself sink down in order to breathe. That's why the Romans broke the legs that would prevent the up and down movement of the people there. So while Christ was moving up and down, the blood was flowing about 15 degrees in different directions. There are 372 scourge wounds on the image from the lashes, approximately 159 on the front and 213 on the back. When a body is in trauma, red blood cells break down rapidly, and excessive bilirubin is in the blood, which a lot of people believe accounts for the prolonged red color of the blood, because it normally turns black. And then there's something called the poker holes. If you look over here, too, you'll see them on this one. They've been there, we don't know how long for sure. We think from around 900, the poker holes were there. And it probably was when the cloth was used as a linen for the Mass, and they were using an incense burner, and the little coals fell on the cloth and burned through. So, when that happened, if you could picture in your mind folding the top of the cloth down to the bottom and then folding it this way, and then the coals burning the holes, there would be 4 layers folding it that way. The top layer, you're seeing it up there, and then the next layer would be down below, which is reversed. So it looks like an L up there, but as you fold it down, it would be reversed. This would be the next one, and then the fourth one, you could barely make it out. Those poker holes have been there, like I said, probably since 900. In the year 1192, the Hungarian Prayer Codex was discovered. It was a book. And in the book is a depiction of crucified Christ and then risen Christ, but you see the cloth. And if you magnify the cloth, you not only see the herringbone weave, which is what it's depicted, but you also see the poker holes in the shape of an L. And we think the red crosses stood for blood. That was 1192, but the carbon dating said that the shroud was forged in 1260 to 1390. Look how similar they are. The shroud, most likely after Christ died, maybe Peter took it up north to Antioch or Edessa, which is southeast Turkey, straight up. Then we know it went to Constantinople, then to Athens, then to Léré, France, eventually to Turin. The face cloth, we believe, went to Jerusalem, was in Jerusalem, went to Alexandria, then in Spain. The image of Edessa, also known as the Mendelian, has been thought to be the first mention of a face on a cloth. And there's a legend that says King Abgar in Edessa had leprosy and asked Christ to send somebody with, he wanted Christ himself to come, and supposedly Christ said, "I'll send my image." I don't know if that's true or not. It probably isn't. We do know that the cloth with a face around it circulated around Edessa for quite a few years. It was found in Edessa in the walls in the year 525 when a flood damaged the walls, and they reconstructed the walls and found a cloth with a face on it. And that face was paraded in the year 544 when the Persians attacked the city of Edessa. And the people who were in Edessa felt that the cloth had saved them. So it took a place of honor. But nobody really talked about a full-length cloth, not until it went to Constantinople in, I think it was 944. Now, right around the same time, this picture appeared. You've seen it because it's the biggest, most revered image of Christ in the Eastern Church. The oldest image was in the 6th century, the same time that the face was on the image of Edessa, the cloth in Edessa. We think the artist of the Pantocrator saw the image of Edessa, and ever since then, this is what Christ looked like. So the way Christ looks like today most likely came from that cloth hidden in the wall. Dr. Alan Wenger studied both images and found there were 170 matching points when comparing the face on the Shroud of Turin with the Christ Pantocrator image. Now, it went to Constantinople in 944, but in 1204, Constantinople was sacked, and all the relics disappeared. A man by the name of Robert de Clary wrote in his memoir that he had seen in a particular church the shroud on Friday afternoons. He saw the shroud in which our Lord had been wrapped, which every Friday was raised upright so one could see the figure of our Lord on it. We think the shroud, the whole length, was in a box, and there was like a rope and pulleys, and at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they pulled it up so you could see the face of Christ and you could see the whole body. Now, there are a lot of theories what happened between 1204 and 1355, but we don't know for sure. But these are the missing years when the shroud moved from the area of Constantinople to Léré, France. And then it eventually went to his daughter, a granddaughter, 1453. Geoffrey de Charnay had the shroud, 1355. He told everybody, to me it was freely given. Didn't say he stole it, he didn't say he bought it, he didn't say he had somebody paint it. It's freely given. He put it in the church. He died shortly thereafter. But his granddaughter had it, and she gave it to the House of Savoy, the ruling house in France and Italy. In exchange for it, she got 2 castles and a pension for life because you couldn't sell relics. So this is where it stayed in Chambéry, France. There was a fire there in 1532, as we talked about. Eventually, it went to Turin in the cathedral that I talked about. And then they built this beautiful chapel, which burned in 1997. So when I went there in 2000, I couldn't see it in the chapel. I had to see it in the church. Now, when you look at the Siderium Oviedo, this was the face cloth on Christ. So picture this. Christ is on the cross, and he dies, and blood is coming out of his mouth. The Jews did not want blood to be lost. They wanted it to be buried. So one of the Jews reached up on the cross and put a face cloth on Christ. And on the left side, you see some red markings. That's blood. They pinned it to the back of his head. They actually made a ponytail back there. Then they wanted to wrap it around 360 degrees around and reattach it back on the ponytail. But because Christ was on the cross with his head this way, rigor mortis was setting in. They pinned it back here, brought it around the mouth, brought it to where they could, and then they couldn't go around, so they folded it back. So that's why you see 2 round areas of blood on it. So it's really interesting to take a look at. I have a exact replica of the shroud, and I played around with it. Not the shroud, the Siderium, and I held it to the back of my head, brought it around, and sure enough, that middle stain went right to my mouth. And then I brought it around to here and then folded it back, and that second stain was over my mouth. And the people in Spain, the researchers, looked at the Shroud of Turin and made a pencil drawing, as you see on the right, and they put the stains from the Siderium overlaid on the face on the shroud. Now that's blood and water. The blood's coming out of the mouth and the nose. Why is there water, or pleural effusion or pleural exudate, flowing up to the forehead? because when Christ was brought down on the cross, they put him on the ground. That was a hill. It turns out his feet were higher than his head, so that the flow, they could actually see when he was on the cross, the blood and water flowed down. When they put him on the ground, water flowed from the mouth over the nose onto the forehead. That amazed me when I read that they knew that. Then they could actually tell he was carried to the tomb horizontally. Now, nobody really studied the shroud until the 1960s. And the reason for that is a number of people, different universities began interested in it, but of course they had the photo negative to look at. So they began looking at the pollen in 1973, but it really wasn't until 1976 when our space program developed, or helped to develop, BP8 image analyzer that reads lights and darks and distance from the recording source. Well, the recording source on the shroud, or in the shroud, is the cloth. So the closer you are, it records that in various ways. And there's three-dimensional information in the cloth that shows up when you put a picture of the shroud into the analyzer. So you don't even need the shroud, just need a photograph. The same people put pictures of their kid in there, and it ended up just garbling. You couldn't see it. That information wasn't encoded. But because of that, people could actually start using the three-dimensional information to do sculpting. So there were about 3 or 4 of these sculptures. The 1978 Shroud of Turin research project consisted of 33 or so Americans. They were everything. They were atheists, they were Jews, some were Catholics, some were Protestants. They went to Turin for 5 straight days, studied every aspect of it. Max Fry was a criminologist, and he studied the pollens. He found that there were 204 pollen grains that went from Jerusalem to Constantinople and everywhere else the shroud had been. He believed that the shroud traveled through Palestine, through Turkey. A pollen needs a microscope to see it. Microscopes weren't invented until hundreds of years after they said the image was forged. Remember, the image is a superficial surface phenomena. The thickness of the image is less than the diameter of a human hair. If you took one of your hairs in your hand, the thickness of the image is 1/10 or less of that. They were able to tell that a dehydration effect gave the image a yellow-brown color, but it wasn't scorched because they used UV fluorescence, and that glows a certain color with heat. And there was no heat on the shroud. So they think a burst of light energy may have caused it. And if you look at a fiber, it's just on the very surface, the yellowing, where the change was. And on the shroud, they studied every part of the shroud and documented it. And they used sticky tape, which is like Scotch tape, and pressed. And they found travertine aragonite, which is found in Jerusalem, very few other places, if any. And they found it on the tip of the nose, the knee, and on the feet. And they published their conclusions in 1981. They said the image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It's not the product of an artist. The blood stains are composed of hemoglobin and give a positive test for serum albumin. The problem of how the image was formed remains unsolved. Well, the Shroud team said there should be 7 different samples taken from 7 different areas, and 7 labs should be used, and they only used 1 site. The British ended up controlling the sampling. And it ended up that they were supposed to do everything and report back to the Vatican, and they didn't. They just basically went to a press conference. Many people think there was an actual plot that was going on, and the Freemasons were involved. I don't know if that's true or not, but many people think that. And then an anonymous donors gave £1 million to the Oxford lab very shortly after the results came in 1260 to 1390. And of course, the press put it in every paper in the world. They didn't put it in every paper later on, when 30 years later it was shown that they probably did not do accurate testing. They took the carbon dating from the quarter of the shroud, which is very contaminated, and this photograph shows the chemical composition in the shroud. They took it in the lower left corner, which is green, totally different than the rest of the shroud. And so you can see Arizona, Zurich, and Oxford were involved, and the years were different. They should have been the same. So it wasn't a homogeneous shroud. Somebody by the name of Ray Rogers, who was really respected, said he found cotton weaving that was done by we don't know who did it for sure, but it was done to patch the area. And then in 2016, Tristan Casabianca, a lawyer from France, independent researcher, had to go to court, basically, and to obtain the raw data from the 3 testing sites, because the British Museum would not give out the raw data for 29 years. Casabianca showed that there was multiple flaws in the study design, interpretation of the results. And he published a very interesting article. And then a new study, not carbon dating, but a study called the wide-angle scattering technique was developed, and it dates polymers. Polymers are the basic building blocks of cellulose, the main component in linen, and it measures the degradation of cellulose. So the researchers examined a linen fiber obtained close to the area that carbon dated the shroud. They compared that fiber to one obtained from the siege of Masada in the year 72, so about 2,000 years old. Both fibers, based upon the degradation of cellulose, were dated to approximately 2,000 years ago. Well, how was the image formed? All the various methods proposed, painting, dusting, rubbing, medieval photography, cannot reproduce the image on the shroud. There are 3 or so radiation theories. I don't know which one of them I really believe in, but something like radiation came, I think, out of the mouth through the teeth and formed that on the shroud. Some sort of light energy discolored the linen. Paolo de Lazzaro, an Italian researcher, well-respected, said to do the whole shroud with an excimer laser, latest that we have, it would take 34 terawatts, which is equal to almost all the light energy that's used in the United States at one time to do that type of discoloration of the shroud. And that light would have to be emitted in less than 1/billionth of a second, or it would scorch or burn the shroud. Impossible. So when we add the evidence, where do you think the preponderance of evidence is? There's a unique image that cannot be duplicated with today's technology. It has 3D information encoded. It's a negative photo image, and photography wasn't discovered until the 1800s. The wounds are anatomically correct, related to scourging and crucifixion. Pollen from Jerusalem, Turkey, Constantinople, some in France and Italy, was found on the shroud. Travertine or aconite found in Jerusalem is on the shroud and the siderium, which we think shows not only do the bloodstains line up like I show you, but both cloths have travertine or aconite on them. And of course, those poker holes were on the Prey Codex in 1192. It's a 3-to-1 herringbone weave linen, which was found in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. At least the possibility exists. The dimensions of the shroud were exactly 8x2 Assyrian cubits. Some of you remember from Noah's Ark, a cubit is measured from the elbow to the hand, right? And the blood came before the image on the shroud, making painting of the shroud virtually impossible. This guy is David Roth. He is a British film producer. He was a skeptic until he started studying it. He became a great believer, and he came up with a challenge. 3 years ago, he said, if anybody can reproduce the image of the Shroud of Turin with all of its characteristics using technology of that time period, 1260 to 1390. He would pay $1 million. People have tried fruit juices and stuff, but nobody's turned it in. Nobody actually tried. Nobody in 3 years. So with that, I'd like to say science cannot fully understand a lot of things, the feeling of love, for instance, nor can it explain all the miracles God has prepared for us. I personally think it was a miracle that that cloth was formed the way it was. If you get a chance to see it, maybe in the year 2033 is a rumor when it will be exposed in Turin, go see it. Thank you very much.